next time you go to spend something impulsive, just say, you know what, I'll hold off on this. I'll give it a couple of days and really think about it if I need it.
This week, we officially passed the halfway point in the year. It's not too late to get things back on track with a financial reset. Here to tell us how to do just that is Michael Houghton. Should people consider a mid-year financial reset?
I think it's very easy to say, oh, look, we'll wait till next year or we'll put it off for a little bit longer. Maybe you've slipped into some bad habits. Maybe those New Year's resolutions didn't come to part, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a look and reset again.
What about the summer months? Do you think there's something to be said for doing it during the summer months?
Definitely, definitely, because your costs are typically lower in the summer. And I say that because you don't have your heating bills, you're not worried, the lights aren't on for so long, various things like that. So there's great opportunity to have a look at those sort of things. The routine changes if you got kids and so on, you're not doing the school runs and so on. So there's an opportunity to have a little bit of a reset there as well and consider how the next 6 months might be.
I suppose the very end of summer might be the sweet spot. I'm thinking September, and maybe this is why no spend, low spend September is taking off because you're kind of out of the childcare squeeze. You've had your holiday, and then you have those few months to kind of gather resources before you get to Christmas.
Yeah, I think so. And it's funny because like I've been running meetup groups on finance for years and years, and September is always, every year is our busiest. We might get 40 people at the September one, and you might find February, March, you might only have 10. So there is always an interest come September. For many families, it's those back to school costs. They're getting used to those, and it's trying to come back to the reality of, look, we need to keep on top of this. There's also obviously that massive C word, the Christmas deadline looming around the
Yes.
corner, and we start thinking about that once summer ends. So yeah, it's coming into an expensive time of year, a time of year where we want to get on top of things. So it's about managing those expectations and making sure we're prepared for it.
Yeah. You recently wrote a piece for us on this mid-year financial reset idea, and you have a series of pointers, and I think we'll move through them. And it's the first one is tracking your expenses. So tell me why this should be the start of
Yeah.
a mid-year financial reset.
I sometimes feel like a stuck record on this one, Katie, because it's someone that I'm often talking about, and it's one that people don't like to do. But it's one of those ones where if you can keep on top of it one way or another, it allows you to review and it makes you more accountable. I've found myself over the years, and I wrote a piece on it, what is a year or so ago, about when I was dieting and trying to lose some weight. When I tracked what I was eating, I was able to stay disciplined. When I stopped tracking what I was eating, well, I put a little bit more weight back on. And it's the same thing with your spending. It's about being accountable for what you spend so that when you are actually spending something, you go, hang on, is this in my budget? Is this something that we've really thought about? And it adds that level of accountability, which I think we need. It's too easy to be impulsive otherwise. And we all find ourselves doing that. We look over a bank statement and go, what was that for? I don't remember that purchase. Why did I buy that? So it just takes that around, it takes that away from us when we kind of track it and we stick to a budget. Because it can be a lot easier. Like managing money is a lot easier once we have a budget in place and we feel like we're in control. And being in control is really the big thing. And this is why step one, track your expenses, is so important. Being in control allows us to feel like we can actually manage this properly, and it's not something that feels difficult because we feel like we've got a plan.
It's something I'm not great at, and I'm especially not great at it when I'm on holiday because, it's lots of foreign ATMs and currency conversions, and it just gets a bit like one, two, skip a few, 99, 100, and I'll look at it next month. Does anyone else, can you relate to that?
Do you know what? That's a really great point, and it's one of those things where, like, I want you to go on holiday and spend as much money as you want to spend. That's a great thing, right? Like that's way better. Like that's way better to have a 10-day holiday and go crazy than constantly throwing money on a car payment that you don't really like, or buying food because you haven't prepared it at home, or having to pull into a convenience supermarket because you didn't do the weekly grocery shop. So those sort of things, like for me, go for it. Like set aside that money to have the holiday. Like if you're actually doing it where you've saved up the money and you want to go and do that, then that's great because it's really hard. Budgeting on holiday is so difficult. I had a client a number of years back that went bankrupt. They couldn't pay me. I was self-employed at the time, and we went to Greece for like 3 weeks, and we were living on nothing because we had no money. And it was miserable because we didn't actually have anything to spend. We had to go out and buy pasta at the local supermarket for like a couple of euro instead of going out for dinner every night, and these sort of things. And we learned firsthand the power of being able to go and enjoy a holiday. So this isn't definitely a thing where we say, look, don't spend money. It's just about spending money on the right things. And if you want to go and have a great holiday, then absolutely save for it, prepare for it, and go wild when you're there.
I really want a day by day account of that holiday. Maybe for another podcast.
Ah, there's only so much. There's so many. You can only sit on the beach for so long and watch people enjoying the local restaurant without
Oh my God.
feeling miserable about it.
Number two on your list is review your savings target. Okay, so we have to assume that a person even has a savings target because a lot of people don't. What is a good savings target? Is there a certain percentage of your take home pay that it should be?
It really depends. Like anything more than you're saving now is obviously a good thing, right? And for many, the savings target might currently be, or the savings might currently be zero or less than zero in some cases. So again, this kind of comes back to the tracking your expenses. Why are we tracking our expenses? So that we actually can see where our money goes and see if we do have any excess money, and we might be able to start saving that. And it's really important that like savings doesn't have to be for the next 60 years. Saving might just be to get through to the back to school expenses, to get through to Christmas, to save for that holiday, Katie, that you talked about earlier. It doesn't have to be long-term saving necessarily from day one. And we need to remember we're all at different phases of life. Right, so somebody that's coming, we see this. I see this at the meetup group all the time. Somebody comes in, they're 20, they've just come out of college, and they're trying to save for early retirement when they're 50. It's like, dude, go and have some fun, right? Like, just keep getting better at focusing on your career and earning more money, but have fun. Somebody might come along. Myself, I was in this situation back in 2017, just had the third kid, just got married. Like we just put all of these costs through. And all of a sudden, I'm giving myself grief. Hey, why aren't we further ahead financially? It's like, well, hang on, you're in family mode. This isn't the time to be saving. So allow yourself to be okay with the fact that you may not be where you want to be, or you might be in a stage of life where you're not saving as much as you want to be saving, but at least acknowledge that and have a plan for when that might start. So as I said, if you're saving 5% at the moment, maybe it's a matter of calling up your pension provider or your employer and saying, look, can we add a little bit more to the pension? Little things like that, where you just start making small micro steps and be comfortable with that, and then slowly increase that savings rate over time.
Mm. Number three, I love is have a monthly money date. We did a piece on this recently, actually. And I think it is so important if you're in a romantic relationship that you do need to sit down and have these chats where you review your finances and set your goals. Tell me how somebody should do that or could do that and how often they should do it.
Yeah, so monthly is obviously great. The first thing I'd say on this one is we need to understand every relationship has a different dynamic. And I see there's three types of couples out there. There's the spender, so two people are like spending money and not so much saving. There's a spender saver, where one likes to save more than the other and one likes to spend more than the other. And there's the saver, where both like to save. And I actually met a couple last week, young couple, they would have been 28, maybe 29. They're from Cork, and they were both saver. They had 200,000 saved in a current account. They had a mortgage mainly paid off. They were hugely financially ahead of virtually everybody in their age group, but they were scared to spend anything because they're constantly worried about their job and maybe what happens if I lose my job. And so you see these dynamics. It's not about one being better than the other. It's just different dynamics. For most people fall into the one saver and one spender dynamic. That's certainly my case. I like to save a little bit more than my wife. And so it creates friction. It creates friction around, so let's say her priorities versus my priorities. And this is the case. She might want to spend because we need clothes for the kids. And I'm going, well, hang on, there's loads of clothes for the kids in the thing. Should we not get some hand-me-downs from the older kids and things? So it becomes these dynamics, and these are the conversations that you have. And what you typically find is that you typically have a consensus of how money should be spent, and it's the little differences that end up becoming the hot topics of these conversations. And the point of having a monthly meeting is that rather than have a heat of the moment discussion where maybe you're a little bit emotional about money, you've got a tie to it, you think, oh my goodness, you have to spend more on this now, what's going on? It allows you to sit down and reflect in a calm headspace rather than this kind of heated discussion where you've got the time to discuss it and work through it. And what we find when we do these monthly meetings is we might go from my wife saying we need to spend 300 euros worth of clothing to go, well, hang on, we'll spend 150 and we'll just get
Yes.
these items and so on. So we find a compromise there along the way.
I'm always curious about you and your wife's relationship because, and the reason being, you know, you write a regular column for us, and you talk about introducing her to fire and kind of pitching it as a concept. This is this aggressive savings method, and you brought her along, and she then came in the journey with you. But I do think to myself, like, what's her boundary where it's just like, no way, Michael, we are not reusing our tea bags, or we're not like, what?
Yeah. To be honest, it's probably bigger than that. I think I mentioned in the first article, it's all about time freedom, right? So I sold her on the time. And the challenge I have these days is that I've sold her down that line. And so these days, when there's anything that involves my time, there's a real pushback from her. So it might be that we want to do something nice to the house, get some new bar. We need lots of renovation here, that we need to do. And it's like I'm like, hey, I'll just pick up a short-term 3-month contract and just do a little bit of extra work to pay for it. No, 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 we're not having you away from. We need you here in the house. We don't want you burnt out from work. So these days, it's become more about that. It's a pushback on actually, the time aspect. But traditionally, yeah, there was lots of little things along the way. Um, and again, everybody's going to be different. So, for us, again, it was kind of more time based, right? So like even things like upgrading the car, I was like, oh, we should upgrade the car. She was like, no, well, does that mean you're going to be working more? So there was always that discussion, and that's been the dynamic for us largely. Now, there was definitely extreme when I was working 2 jobs and I was away, and it's kind of funny because for me that was extreme burnout. But when I did that, and yeah, I was working maybe 16 hours a day, the kids were young. They were going down at 7 o'clock each night. So she didn't actually feel it. I was working up to midnight each night, but she didn't actually notice it. I'd get up and crack on. So it's funny when we look back and I kind of say, geez, that was a tough time. She goes, oh, was it? I didn't really notice. So again, it comes back to that timing in the relationship, where you're at with your kids, if you have kids. If not, do you want to stretch it? If you don't want to, that's fine. It's about understanding that. That's what I've kind of learned from it. These days, I wouldn't do it because of the time freedom aspect. But previously, I would have done it.
Mm. Number four is max out your pension. Now, let's just say easier said than done. I don't think everyone can max out their pension. But I suppose what you're saying here is that, even increase it by a percentage point.
I mean, look, pensions, obviously, like they sound boring, right? And if you're young, they sound like there's something that's years and years away and it doesn't have any relevance. But ultimately, it's just a long-term savings scheme. And they're so tax efficient. So whatever you put into them, usually if you're on the top rate of tax, it's so much more efficient to put in. Like we've talked about this before. We know that for every €100 you save in a pension, you would need to basically earn €200 to get that €100 yourself. So it's hugely tax efficient in terms of what you can do. And there are limits depending on your age of what the maximum are. And again, if you can increase that and increase that over time, you'll probably find the ironic thing is you won't notice it day to day, and you won't notice it by as much as it sounds because it's an after-tax situation and a pre-tax situation. So again, just have a look at that and see if it does make a difference for you. The only exception I really make on pensions is if you are looking to save for your first home, then it usually makes sense to draw down that money and save that for your first deposit rather than going straight into a pension. But once you've got your home established, maximizing your pension is usually your next best port of call.
Yes, yeah. And you know what I would add to that? Just see what it looks like. Because, even the idea of maxing it out sounds terrifying, but just go on to salaryaftertax.com and just do some calcs just to get a sense. Do you know what I mean? What would it look like if I put another percent in? Or what if it went up to 7% or even 10?
I always say, like, my first pension contribution was 500 a month, and I was so nervous about it. I felt like the biggest expense ever going in. And now when I look back, it's almost laughable that it seems scary, but again, it's about getting comfortable with these things. We don't have to go from one extreme to another. I was with my son early, he's 9 years of age, and I took him to the skate park, and he went to the top of the ramp and he looked down, and he was absolutely scared. And of course he would. If you go to any of those skate parks and look down, it's super scary. And what I did was I put him on his little skate thing and I took him halfway down and I started him. The first go was just a quarter, and then a half, and then a three-quarter. And do you know what? By the end, he was going from the top because we started small and we allowed him to get used to it. And money is the same thing. I know it's an easy story to sell, but we start small and we get used to that and we gradually build on that each and every month. And then
Yes.
by the end, we'll be looking back in a few years' time going, wow, I can't believe the progress.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Number five is review the fund your pension is in. This is just a can we kick down the road because you kind of think when you have your to-do list, it's like, well, you know what, I've got 25 years to do this, but yet it is the most important thing.
It is amazingly important. I have a golf buddy of mine. He's a good friend. He's now 60. He's retiring early, relatively early for his age. And 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we were on the golf course and he was telling me what funds he was in. And I was like, dude, these aren't great. You need to, let's talk about being in index funds, global index funds instead. And he switched. He went to his financial advisor and in fairness to him, he changed and he worked it out. That decision alone has saved him or has allowed him to have 300,000 more because of that switch. He
Whoa.
actually calculated it. So it is a big decision, and the numbers get bigger the longer that you're in the pension. And yeah, if we can change that early and be used to that volatility and understand that fees have a massive impact, that being in cash and bonds early on isn't where we should be. We want to be in global equities in what's called an index fund, where we're buying the whole market. We're not selecting individual stocks. We're in a great place then, and we just ride the ups and downs, ignore the noise of the market, and keep buying it long term. And you'll find when you hit that age where you can draw down that pension, it'll make a massive difference.
That brings us to number six, which is it isn't too late to invest in the stock market. So, for the person doing their mid-year financial reset, I guess what you're suggesting here is that they consider investing. So we've got somebody here at absolute ground zero. What is that first step then?
Yeah, yeah. So the big thing here is like it's scary at the moment. It's always scary in the share market, right? Because there's all this global stuff that happens. It's out of our control, and we feel like we don't understand the markets. And you hear from friends, "Oh, the share market's overvalued. Oh, I wouldn't be buying it now." All these sort of things. And the thing that we have to remember is that we are buying for the long term, right? Typically more than 5 years, but in most cases, 20, 30 years down the line. And when we look back in 20 and 30 years, we're going to look back at the share market and go, gee, that's, all those problems are solved. All those things that were scary today are no longer scary. We'll have all these other new things and all these other new advancements in technology. So we need to realize that just because the share market is high now and it's at record highs, that's normal. That's a normal part of the process. So the first thing is ignore the noise. Ignore what everybody says about it's the wrong time. Oh, I wouldn't do this now. And the second thing is, yeah, get a little bit of understanding of what it is you should be buying. We're trying to buy, in this case, in most cases, we recommend buying a global index fund. We're buying the top 2,000 of the world's companies. And it doesn't matter then if one country goes down and one country does well and so on. We're just trying to buy the whole market and let time do its thing, let the time in the market do its thing. So again, it's about having that conversation with a financial advisor. They should be telling you this anyway, right? Like this is what they should be recommending. This is the best investment you can make. It's the lowest fees. It's got the most likelihood of success long term. So if they're not saying that, then that's a different conversation and maybe seek different advice. And again, I'm not a financial advisor myself, right? I'm just a consumer, so to speak, an individual out there. But this is what you're going to be looking for when it comes to trying to get that advice and what funds you need to be going into.
Number seven is you can still buy your first home. From that, I take, Michael, that you might see a sense of disillusionment kind of creep in with first time buyers.
Yeah, it's really tough. Like the market is really, really tough out there, right? So it's easy to go, man, this is brutal. Let's give up. This is too hard. And I've had many friends this year that have helped actually try and secure their first house, and they've had success. And the big thing that I'd say is if you're finding it tough, is to understand that this is all just it's a numbers game. I know it's terrible to say, there's obviously emotion tied to your first house and everything. But at the end, the more houses you look at, the more reasonable offers you put in, at some stage you are going to get success. At some stage it's going to come back to you. And there's no pattern with property. This is a big thing. You might go to one property and there's a massive bidding war and it's 50 grand above asking price, and you're like, man, this is crazy. Go to a second property. Sometimes it's a property next door. And there's no bidding war for whatever reason, right? Like a bidding war can happen because two aggressive buyers really want the property, and next time that aggressive buyer isn't there. So you just got to understand it's a numbers game. Keep trying. The more places you can look at, the more time you can give to actually trying to do this, the better. I have one friend, he's been trying for a while, and I sat down with him and said, look, how many houses are you looking at a month? He's like, oh, one. It's like, dude, like, the friend that bought recently was looking at one a day, five, six,
Yeah.
seven a week, going to listings, building relationships with auctioneers and agents. And that made all the difference. The auctioneers would start calling them up to say, hey, look, we know you're buying, we've got a new listing coming on. Do you want to be the first to look at it?
Yes.
And this is what happens when you put yourself out there.
And you've bought several investment properties. So I'm wondering, like, how much of your day do you spend looking at properties online?
Yeah, to be honest, Katie, when I'm on and we're cash ready to go, it's it's a lot. It's an hour a day. It's an hour a day minimum, I'd say,
Okay.
to be honest. It's browsing the internet every evening, going to listings, emailing auctioneers. It's almost nice to not be looking for a while. So yeah, it is. It's a massive thing. It consumes you. It really
Yes.
does consume you. We bought a holiday home last year in West Clare. That for 6 months was all me and my wife talked about
Okay.
was trying to find that and looking at places, going to driving out and back all the time. When we finally got that sale agreed, we were in tears. We were over the moon. It was such an emotional high for us because A, we thought we did it, but B, the journey was over to try and find it, and that would have exhausted us.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is. That's why I say it's not too late. It is possible because if you've been looking since the start of the year, you might be thinking, "Man, this is exhausting," and it is. That's the nature of it.
We hear a lot about the hidden job market. Is there a hidden property market? Because you talk there about, contacting estate agents. So do they have stuff on file that might not necessarily be on a property website?
Sometimes, but to be honest, like in this market, like it's not as easy as it used to be because like most people that are going to put their house on the market are going to bring it to market because they want to get the best price. But every so often there is something that comes up and there might be some old stock, there might be something like that. So again, it's about building those relationships. You don't know until you have that built up. But sometimes it's nice just to get a first look. Equally, like I prefer to try and buy stuff that's been sitting for a while. And I mentioned earlier, not everything goes to bidding war, not everything sells within 3 weeks. So sometimes it's a diamond in the rough that for whatever reason just hasn't had that much interest.
Number 8 is review your mortgage rate.
Yeah, and again, like this is a little bit timely because we don't know where interest rates are going to be going, right? There's talk of them increasing. So again, it might be a good time to fix your rate if you're worried about rates going up potentially. It might be a good time just to have a switch and shop around and see where things are at. And probably this is another one, Katie, that you talked about earlier about pension funds and all of those sort of things. It may not seem that important day to day, but if you are looking to save even a little bit of money, then switching might be a valuable option. And in many cases, when you do switch to it, and in many cases, when you do switch to a different bank, they're giving you some cash to switch, so it's covering the legal fees, and you might find there's even a little bit of tax-free income coming in because of that. It might be a little bit extra.
Yeah. You recently switched.
I did. I went through it. Yeah, yeah. Recently switched. We were with Finance Ireland before that, and they stopped wanting to do retail mortgages, basically, or the standard mortgage, and their rates were ludicrous. They've gone up to like 5% plus. So yeah, we had to switch to a pillar bank, and it was a little bit of work. I'm not going to lie, it was a little bit of work, but well worth it now that it's done.
Mm. Number 9, Michael, is top up the emergency fund.
Yeah, this is one that I need to take a little bit of advice from myself, Katie. Our emergency fund is in the hammer a little bit at the moment, and it happens, right? The entire purpose of an emergency fund is to spend it during an emergency, right? And
Yes.
sometimes we have to spend it. So just review it. Where is it at? Have you got as much saved as you want to have saved? And as I alluded to earlier, this time of year, without the heating bills and all those sort of things, can be a good time to be topping up the emergency fund. And equally as well, just another one there, I always replace, like we just put a stove in. I always do like my boilers and stoves in the summertime because you can actually get hold of a plumber to do the job and they won't charge you as much because they're not under so much demand. So we do those sort of jobs in the summer. Again, we might take from the emergency fund to do those sort of jobs, but then come the winter time, we're going to be all sorted. So yeah, it's a good time just to reflect. And if you do have a good emergency fund, why not see what emergencies there are to potentially get done?
Yeah. Number 10, put some money away for the winter bills. I love this one because, those bills, particularly for energy heating can come on hot and heavy. So tell me how
Yeah.
you prepare for that.
Yeah, so again, like we just try each and every month we put €100 away into what I call the winter heating bill. And so for 6 months of the year when we're not using the heating, by the time that October rolls around, we have €600 there ready to go. And we keep adding to the pile each and every winter. And you'll find that what happens is it pretty much stays steady then throughout the year. So it's just nice to know that the money's there come October, that when you start boiling up the boiler or turning on the boiler again, the money is there for you.
Yes. And then finally, number 11, save early for seasonal events. So I think you mentioned the C word earlier. I think this is, we can say the C word. So we're really talking about Christmas here, and I guess birthdays as well. But Christmas is definitely coming down the line.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, this whole concept starts from a simple thing like Christmas, where you start saving annually for it, or the winter heating bills. And what happened with us is that we started doing that, but we started adding more and more things to the list, right? So a good example is the car tax comes once a year, or the car insurance, or the home insurance, or the health insurance. There's so many annual events. And over time, as these things have come up, we've been saving for them annually. So I know that my car tax is 190 euros a year. That sounds crazy, but I literally put 19 euros aside each month to cover it. So I normally divide by 10. That way you get a couple of months for free. You can divide by 12, it doesn't matter. But you put this money aside. So you just have it aside, you save it or whatever, but you get into the habit of doing it. And so it's got to a point that I know, give or take, each month, I'm going to need to spend 1,000 euros on some sort of seasonal event, whether it's Christmas or birthdays or car or home insurance or whatever. And it just goes in. And so each and every month, I know it, I have it there, it's there to pay, and there's no stress. And I forecast it 12 months out. I know exactly what's going in. And again, this is super nerdy, like this is super next level, but it doesn't need to start that advanced. It can start with as simple as one thing that you put away 100 euros for a month. But after a while, you'll add to it, you'll get more comfortable with enhancing that if you like, and you can you just get on top of these things, and it's a great place to be.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up then with that one thing. What is that thing that a person can do today if they want to do a mid-year financial reset light? They don't necessarily want to take on the whole program, but they want to do just one thing that might make a difference by year end.
Do you know what I would say? Open a bank statement, look through the last 30 days of transactions, and is there one thing there that you think, I actually don't need that? It might be a Disney Plus subscription and you're no longer watching Disney Plus. Cancel it. Takes 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It might be that gym membership that you're paying for that, are you really going to the gym that often? Could you pay per class? Is that a cheaper way? Just one thing in the bank statement. Just have a look at that. That's the easiest way to start because it literally takes one thing to get going. And you can, suddenly there's 20 euros a month saved. You go from there.
Yeah. Michael, everyone says that. Every financial advisor, it always starts, and yet it's the one that I particularly, and I know a lot of other listeners just resist the most. Is it like when a personal trainer tells you it's like the exercise that you resist the most is the one you need the most, possibly?
Yeah, it is. Like it is. And like on exercise is a good one, right? Like in many ways, like not picking up the donut is the first thing to do, right? Like before you even worry about going to the gym. And that's easier said than done at times as well. And so again, even if that's too hard, next time you go to spend something impulsive, just say, you know what, I'll hold off on this. I'll give it a couple of days and really think about it if I need it. It could be as simple as that. So it doesn't even need to be looking back at the past. It could be what your next transaction is. Is this something I really need? Am I buying this in the right shop? Should I be looking around and making a little bit longer before I decide on that purchase?
Yeah. Michael Houghton, thank you so much.